All language contains presuppositions. Within the meta-model, all of the language patterns that we're going to be studying act as presuppositions within the utterance or the statement that's made. From the most complex sentence that you can imagine to the simplest utterance, every statement contains presuppositions. I'm going to give you a sentence, and I'm going to ask you to pay attention to what you think is presupposed, what you have to assume is there in order for the sentence to make sense. So, this is a sentence that was written on the chalkboard on my first day at university in Linguistics 101. Famous sentence, and it is, "The cat sat on the mat." All right, so tell me, what do you think we have to presuppose in order to make sense out of the sentence? We have to presuppose, first of all, that there's an object or an entity called a cat. We have to presuppose that there's an object or an entity called mat. And we have to presuppose that there's some sort of relationship between those two called sat. Trivial sentence. But when we get into more complex sentences and we add in nonverbal behavior and we add in emotions, the presuppositions become mission critical in understanding and then influencing what other people are going to do. Because presuppositions are through every single utterance or communication, we're going to place them at the top of the meta-model. Now, I know this might be a little different from the way you've learned it before, if you've been exposed to the meta-model, or indeed if you've read about the meta-model in a book. But this DVD is not about the way the meta-model was and the way it was written down, but the way it was used, and especially the way that it's used by people who are very, very good in applying it. In 1994, I took my first training with Richard Bandler, and it was a bit of a shock. Aside from Richard's unique personality, his use of language was substantially different from any of the other people who were around in the early days of NLP. And more than that, he seemed to be getting much better results much more quickly. Now, I had learned the meta-model in a very mechanistic stimulus response. Somebody says, "I'm depressed," you say, "About what?" Back and forth kind of style. And in listening to Richard ask people questions and use language in order to create change, I noticed that he was asking the wrong questions from the point of view of the old style of working with the meta-model. Now, I started asking Richard some really, really dumb questions. And Richard very kindly gave me some answers and gave me some references and told me some things to do. And as I started to explore and ask questions, what became apparent was that the way that I had been taught to use the meta-model was not the way that one uses the meta-model in order to get results. The way that I had been taught was the way you learn the meta-model as an academic or a therapeutic tool, rather than for helping people to change and get more of the things that they want. In The Structure of Magic, which was the first outing for the meta-model, Bandler and Grinder outline 29 syntactic environments, they called them, places within an utterance or within a sentence where presuppositions will live. 29 syntactic environments for presuppositions in English. Now, that's an example of what I call hobnozzle defognostication. What that means is that we're using an awful lot of words to dignify something that's very, very simple. Essentially, there's 29 basic forms of presupposition within language in English, and what's going to make this easy for you to learn is that you've already heard them or used them yourself before. Sometimes people get into a kind of a negative state around learning presuppositions or learning the entire meta-model because they see that it's got labels for each of the patterns. Now, those labels were created in an academic context. They weren't there to create clarity around how to use the patterns. They were there to make them seem more impressive and fit in with academic styles of presentation. The labels are the least important part around learning the meta-model, and especially when you're learning the presuppositions. I mean, would you rather know what a subordinate clause of time is, or would you rather know how to use it and be competent at using it? For our purposes, at this stage of the game, I mean, the only reason why you'd need to learn the labels would be maybe if you wanted to be a big shot at conferences, you know, spew big words. Right? You don't need the labels at this stage. But what you do need is to listen and practice. One of the most important things that you need to grasp around using the meta model that's different from what you might have read in some introduction to NLP or been taught on your course is that in applying the meta model, we don't just go after any so-called meta model violation that happens to come to our attention. It's not about picking out the smallest components within a statement or in an utterance and then challenging the meta model patterns there. What we want to do is we want to treat the entire utterance, the entire statement, as if it's a whole map. You see, we're not challenging language patterns. What we're doing is asking questions on the basis of an entire idea. Consequently, we have to organize the meta model in such a way that the most ubiquitous, most generalized patterns are the ones that we tend to ask questions about first. Those patterns that when we ask a question, it will have the greatest impact on the idea as a whole before we go challenging the ideas in terms of their specifics.